Before we begin, take a breath and let the noise of the world fade away. Imagine an earth before memory, before cities or borders, when life moved with the rhythm of the wild. The air was heavy with mist, the ground soft with the prints of giants. Across vast plains, thunder walked on four legs, and the sky trembled beneath wings that blotted out the sun. In their shadow, small fires flickered, fragile lights kept by hands that shaped stone and carried hope. They were not rulers, only survivors, hidden among titans. Their stories lie buried in the bones beneath our feet, waiting to be heard again. Before we step into their forgotten world, make sure you're subscribed and your notifications are on, because stories like this, stories buried by time, deserve to live again. And tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Let's see how far the memory of these ancient humans still reaches as we return to the world before history, where humanity walked among giants. Night arrives like a slow tide, and the world inhales until the stars press close as embers. In that breath, before names and histories, the earth is a cathedral of frost. Wind combs the open plains in long silver strokes. Snow hushes the ground until footsteps become secrets and bodies become candles whose flames are breath. Here, before the first boundary of a field or the first oath to a city, humans are small and enduring dark figures stitched to the white with sinew and will. They move by the grammar of weather, the verb of snowfall, the noun of stone, the soft conjunction of fire cupped in their hands. The sky bears its ancient cargo constellations flung like bone beads from a hunter's necklace. They are maps, prayers, and drums of light at once, beating time no voice can hold. Beneath them, the people keep the old time, the walking rhythm, the listening pace. They follow the low blue of rivers cased in ice, the dappled darkness of conifer bands, the ribs of mountains lifting to the moon. Hunger is a companion, sharp and faithful. Silence is a teacher, stricter still. The smell of tallow smoke threads hair and fur. The tang of flint dust coats the tongue when edges are coaxed from stone. Mammoth herds pass with the weight of weather itself. Their bellies steam, their breath ropes the air in braided trails. Cats with sabers for mouths read the snow with their whiskers and their paws, writing messages in pressure and shadow. A rhinoceros made for winter grinds the ice with its horn like a plow. Bones speak in their own grammar. A shattered tibia recounts the sprint that failed, a polished antler the patience that did not. The living carry these lessons on their backs, in their scars, in the small architecture of their shelters, whose ribs are mammoth, whose skin is stitched sky. Fire is the one domesticated star. Children sleep to its breathing and wake to its ash sugar smudged on their cheeks. The hunters warm their hands above it before moving toward the edge of night, where hooves have fretted powder into granular whispers. The women braid sinew into line, twist fiber into cord, and sing without words to keep the heart from splintering in the cold. All of it is endurance made beautiful and blunt. When dawn flexes, and the ice gives back a little light, they rise without ceremony. Nothing changes, and everything does. Another page turns in a book, the wind keeps writing. Far to the south, a thaw begins its slow conspiracy. Far to the north, darkness contemplates the day. Between them, the people move, and the frost breathes in again, preparing for the long exhale of a world about to remember spring. And so the night loosens its hold, and the story walks forward toward the first spark on the first stone, where heat learns the names of our hands. Listen, a thin chime, bright as a star struck with a fingernail. Flint greets antler with a clean blue note. A blade wakes from the dark vein of rock. Each flake is a petal of winter's flower, razor thin, translucent as ice on river's edge. Hands rehearse, old moves strike, press, lift until the edge becomes an argument no hide can answer. The tool gathers the cold into its bevel, a crescent of intention sharpened by repetition and need. Around the workers, the camp breathes. Sinew dries, taut as bowstring. Fat renders slow as the moon's own patience, a quiet algebra of heat turning bone and hide into food, smoke into calendar. The smell is sweet and mineral, an incense of survival that settles in hair, in woven grasses, in the throat. Infants murmur at the warm drum of their mother's skin. Elders tell the weather by the stiffness in their knuckles, by a taste of iron that means snow. The world is a pupil dilating to light. On the horizon, mammoths darken and pale as the wind rearranges distance. Closer, the small talk of ravens annotates everything: this way, meat; that way, danger; always sky. A fox writes cursive in the powder, trailing questions the people choose not to answer. They are busy with the small, sovereign work: hide scraped to song, sinew split into rivers of strength, needles carved from splinters of bone that still remember the living swing of tendon and muscle. Here the hunters test their new edges. One draws the blade along his thumb and tastes clean blood, not for pain but for certainty. The point must enter as if it were invited. The line must cut, like winter's idea of mercy. They bind stone to shaft with pitch and fiber, a marriage of earths, the wooden vein and the napped star. Each spear is a promise with distance in it, a straight sentence thrown into the future. The first throw will be later, at dusk, when the snow turns violet and the wind's teeth lose their keen. For now, the camp flexes and settles. Laughter flares. A brief orange. A woman tests thread with her teeth. A child learns the constellations of scars in a father's palm. The long bones of a reindeer become flutes. Someone plays. The tune is as old as wanting, as simple as breath, and the air carries it out to the creatures who listen without believing. Night returns. A felt pulled across the sky. The flint's last ring fades to a memory you can hold only in the hand that made it. The blades lie in their nest of leather. The fires gutter to a red alphabet few can read but all can feel. Snow begins again, quiet punctuation on the camp's slow sentence. Beyond the circle of warmth, tracks wait like unspoken vows. The morning will test the grammar of the edge, and the song will walk on in the muscles of the hunt. Hunger is an anchor and a compass. It tethers the ribs to the weather and points the feet toward movement. The north wind descends in a clear, iron mood, flattening the grasses until they shine like hammered metal. Under that weight, the people tighten their belts and their focus. Every sound becomes a possibility. The hush of snow against bark, the crisp syllable of ice cracking on a river's back, the soft conspiracies of voles writing dark cursive beneath the white. They travel in the old geometry triangles between water, shelter, game. Hills roll like knuckles under a glove. The horizon constantly edits itself with the long eraser of blowing powder. Faces chap to maps of rivers and ridges, eyelashes frost to a brief silver crown. Breath feathers the air, each exhalation a bird that cannot fly far before falling. Yet movement warms, movement feeds. Movement is the only answer to winter's long question. Their thoughts simplify until they shine. Where is the drift that hides fuel? Which aldergrove humors pheasant? What rib of ice will hold? They pass a fallen giant, a spruce laid down by years and wind. Its heartwood yawns open like a mouth. Its rings remember rains no language holds anymore. Children touch the spiral with mittened hands, reading its slow book as far as cold will let them. The elders smile at the ritual another way the living braid themselves to time. At dusk, the sky lowers until it can smell their smoke. Fat burns steady, the pot hisses in the key of survival. Meat loosens from its discipline, becoming tender under the arithmetic of flame and patience. A marrow bone cracks, and the air briefly sweetens with animal memory. They eat, and in doing so, accept the old covenant that life will pass through life to keep light on in the skull for one more day. Sleep comes like a second fire under the skin. The dream work begins. Staircases of ice, fields of summer grass that feel like a language you once knew, the shadow of mammoth swinging its lanthorn tusks through fog. Even dreams have chores, stitching torn places, closed, washing the heart free of cold's arithmetic. When they wake, frost outlines their breaths on the shelter's hide, as if someone traced their sleeping voices with a white, careful hand. Morning's knife edge cuts the wind into blue facets. Hunger still sits at the table, grinning, but it is quieter now, sated enough to let the muscles remember joy. Tracks, delicate as thought, cross the creek's glazed back. The tribe moves again, lighter. Ahead, a valley waits where wind gentles, where hooves have scuffed the snow to a gray hush. The world loosens its fist, and the day opens like a palm holding the first small answer to hunger. Time in stone does not flow. It compresses. Hold a shale and you hold a season pinned into slate, 1,000 afternoons translated into pressure and quiet. Radiometric clocks, those faint lanterns lit by the soft retreat of unstable atoms, burn steadily in the darkness, counting down in whispers too small for breath. We lean close and read what we can. Half-lives like heartbeats too slow to hear, isotopes narrating the long fade from fire to ash to crystal. Yet even with such lamps, the cave of history is vast, and the walls complex with echoes. Geology rearranges memory. Sediments tilt, faults step in like editors, rivers tear out pages to carry them far from their original chapters. Lava seals the text. Glaciers abrade paragraphs into palimpsest. A footprint can become a fossil the way a word becomes proverb, repeated, preserved, unmoored from the voice that spoke it. When we place one layer beside another, we build a story with seams, stitching ruptures with inference, gaps with modest conjecture, and sometimes with songs that feel like truth. In the deep stacks of rock, time is not a line but a stratified choir. Cretaceous limestones hum in marine keys, Pleistocene tills grind in a glacier's low register, volcanic tuffs brighten the chorus with sudden, sharp harmonies. Our measurements are instruments: uranium lead, argon, radiocarbon fading like a winter sun after 50,000 years. Each method plays its range and then grows quiet, handing the melody to the next instrument down the scale. We follow, weighting evidence like snow on branches, wary of collapse and yet trusting the tree. Still, the blurred margins remain. Fossils migrate into younger sediments under the patience of roots or the shove of flood. Ancient burrows complicate clean sequences. A quake folds or inverts a chapter until up becomes down. When we step onto the rock, we step onto a story that has been revised by the authoring of the world itself. Certainty is a camp we visit, not a city where we live. This is not failure. It is texture. The time problem keeps humility close, a cloak against the cold of arrogance. It reminds us that the night sky we measure is shifting even as we name it, that constellations are migratory, and that our own bones, one day, will join the library we now read. We move forward carrying clocks that glow faintly in the palm, careful of draft, grateful for their steadiness. And with these lamps cupped in our hands, we turn toward the riverbeds and their interleaved confessions toward the tracks that ask to be read with both caution and wonder. There is a particular silence that follows discovery, a pause where the air feels heavy with intent. Along a shallow river in a warm season, mud once took an impression and decided to keep it. The sun stiffened the edges, silt laid its soft hand across the forms, and time carried them gently into stone. Now the water runs thin over limestone flats inscribed with travel. Three-toed prints, walking in a cadence older than our kind. Elsewhere, in a different world and a different epoch, a pair of hominin feet crossing volcanic ash at Laetoli. Toes splayed, heels sure, the gait unmistakably human. We bring our questions like offerings. In Texas, stories grew around odd convergences, tracks that some said braided human and dinosaur into a single path. In Tanzania, the Laetoli prints lifted a veil on a morning long gone, where early human kin moved through a rain of ash with a calm that required no audience. Science sharpened its eyes, cleaned its lenses, scraped away the moss of wishful thinking and the stains of haste. At Paluxy, erosion, infill, and time's mischief made readings complicated. At Laetoli, reanalyses and fresh excavations brought clarity to stride and species, to the very shape of our earliest steps. A footprint is a temporary agreement with the earth. It says, "I was here. The ground accepted me." Weight translated into form. When sediment agrees to remember, myth approaches, asking to share the fire. On one page of rock, a great three-toed hunter tracks some forgotten errand. On another page, in ash that set like plaster, a family walks together past a volcano's fresh scar. The pages are bound to different volumes, shelved far apart in the archive of time. It is human to wish the books would lean into one another, to arrange themselves alphabetically by wonder. Yet the testimony is beautiful even without coincidence. Dinosaur tracks keep the choreography of animals that lived in empires of fern and sun. Hominin tracks record weather, intention, companionship. The Paluxy bed tells of floods and sediments, of editing hands that turned mud to rumor. Laetoli sings of uprightness, of feet that negotiated softness and kept faith with balance. Both remind us that motion is memory, and that stone, when properly invited, can be a diary. Kneeling beside such trails, you feel the wind take a slower breath, as if the world itself were reading over your shoulder. Somewhere upstream, a heron resets the current with one deliberate step. Somewhere downstream, a child, thousands of years from now, will place their foot where yours has been and feel the small electricity of recognition. And we carry that charge onward into the shadowed vaults of memory toward the caves where ochre and charcoal taught walls to hold the fading thunder of giants. When the night gathers thick in the mouth of a cave, fire speaks in colors the day has never learned. On those rough, cool walls, hands left outlines like comets, and animals emerged from mineral-grained bison rolling from limestone like thunderheads, horses running in a wind painted from breath, lions whose eyes watched hunters even after the torch went dark. The artists, winter thin and summer strong, carried the world into shelter and asked it to lie still long enough to be remembered. The result is a choir in ochre and carbon, a patient music that still sings when all the singers sleep. Far from these chambers, myths rose where bones met air. A shepherd pried a fossil from a hillside and found a skull with a single cavernous opening. A cyclops took shape to guard the sheepfolds of the mind. In deserts where rock turns to story, people found vertebrae the size of shields and dreamed of dragons exhaling the season's last heat. In the far north, old tusks emerged yellow as winter butter from riverbanks, and the imagination grew mammoth again, thick with the velvet of ancient grasslands. Thunderbirds took flight from cliffs that shed the wings of pterosaurs. Leviathans rolled in from beaches where whale bones bleached to scripture. The border between stone and story is generous. Fossils propose. Myth composes. One keeps patience in mineral. The other keeps awe in metaphor. Together they preserve a world that might otherwise have slipped, unhandled, from the fingers of memory. In the dance of cave light, the line between knowledge and reverence blurs. These are not only animals, they are seasons, lessons, companions, warnings. The people painted what moved them and what moved around them. The curve of a horn deep as a river meander, the stance of a cat tense as dusk, the hoofprint that means tomorrow will arrive. Even now, stepping into the cooled breath of a painted chamber, you feel the pulse slow to match the ancient metronome. Drips mark time, ash stores it. The figures seem to breathe when the torch wavers, and in that breath is the old contract. Remember us as we were, move as we moved. Do not forget the grammar of hoof and frost, the syntax of fire on stone. Outside, in starlight sharp enough to cut cloth, the wind combs the grass in the same direction it always has. We climb back into the night with our lamp cupped, our voices lowered by the weight of what endures. Somewhere the steppe unrolls under a patient moon, and somewhere a herd is already printing news across the morning's first dusting of snow. And so the path bends toward the living giants themselves, toward the cold kingdoms where tusk and claw shared weather with our small, persistent fires. The air once held a weight it no longer remembers. Across frozen plains of the north, the land moved not with wind or water, but with life. Herds of mammoths rolled like continents, their tusks sweeping the mist as if to carve paths through time. Giant sloths lumbered through low forests, pulling down entire branches with a lazy grace. Saber-toothed cats prowled the edge of silence, their shadows longer than thought. The air trembled under their breath, the ground knew their pulse. It was an age shaped by cold and courage. The sun burned pale, the nights lingered like deep water, and yet life persisted. Every creature was a testament to endurance, to the art of becoming vast in a world that asked for patience. Among these giants, smaller fires flickered in the dark, Humans, fragile and fierce, watched from the periphery. Their eyes glowed with reflection, the same spark that would one day light cities, though for now it only warmed their hands. They studied the mammoth's gait, the cat's stillness, the migration of herds that moved with the seasons like rivers of flesh. They learned not through conquest but through observation. The mammoth's path became their map. Its fall, their survival. When a giant perished, the people came like moths to its heat, carving from bone and tendon the instruments of persistence. Nothing was wasted, not life, not death, not memory. And as the world grew colder, so did their resolve. Fire became their companion, flint their covenant. In their breath rose the first myth that the earth itself dreamed, and its dreams had tusks and teeth. The giants ruled the body of the world, the humans began to rule its soul. And when the last herds drifted east beneath a gray dawn, the small fires followed, moving quietly through the frost, carrying within them the promise of memory. In the endless dusk of the Ice Age, light was not given, it was earned. Fire did not yet belong to humans. It was a secret stolen from storms, a temperamental god tamed by persistence. Around it, the people gathered like moths circling the heart of creation. Outside the glow, the world was fanged and waiting. Wolves howled across the tundra, their cries threading through the cold like ropes of sound. Shadows shifted, some curious, some hungry. The hunters watched with the same stillness as their prey, feeling the ancient rhythm between predator and survivor. When the strike came, it came without sound. Spears arced through air as sharp as glass. The mammoth fell, the snow shaking loose from trees like applause of ghosts. Then came silence, a silence so total it became sacred. The hunters approached the fallen body as if entering a cathedral. They carved warmth from its enormity, meat to feed, hide to shield, bone to build. Its death became their life, its memory their shelter. By its light, they learned gratitude, and from its weight, humility. Fire hissed, licking fat from tusk and timber. Sparks rose into the night, like lost souls ascending. In their faces glowed the reflection of the eternal cycle. Hunger, labor, fire, rest. Each heartbeat was a drum against the cold, each breath a defiance of extinction. They were still part of the world's wild balance, neither masters nor outcasts, but participants in the old covenant of survival. As dawn unfurled across the frozen steppe, smoke curled upward into a sky the color of bone. The world was vast, and the people were small. But their warmth outshone the stars. And in that fragile glow, the earth itself seemed to breathe, whispering that endurance was its truest form of love. Long before our own reflections stared back from the water, others walked beside us. They shaped stone, carried fire, and sang to the night, though no word of their songs remains. The earth was crowded then, not just with beasts, but with kinds of human thought now vanished into dust. Homo erectus strode across Asia, tall and tireless, chasing game across horizons that no longer exist. In the caves of Europe, Neanderthals shaped tools from flint and bone, their hands thick with skill and sorrow. Far in the east, Denisovans breathed the thin air of mountains, crafting survival from frost. And in the warm forests of Indonesia, small hands, those of Homo floresiensis, built fires beneath the watching eyes of Komodo dragons. Each species carried a version of our story. The same spark, the same hunger, the same fragile defiance against the cold. They were not our ancestors alone, they were our companions. For thousands of years, they shared the world with us until the silence took them. Their bones lie beneath layers of earth, but their breath lingers in ours. Their blood still hums within our veins, a genetic chorus whispering that memory does not die, it adapts. We are their continuation. The sum of every failed beginning and every surviving spark. If the stars had language, they would tell it simply. Humanity was never singular. We were always many. A constellation of wanderers, scattered but connected, each carrying a piece of the world's first fire. And though their names have vanished into stone, their endurance remains. Every step we take is their echo, every heartbeat their inheritance. And as night folds the world in silver silence, the wind carries their ghosts forward, mingling breath with breath, until even time forgets where one life ended and another began. In the depths of Siberia, beneath mountains veiled in snow and silence, there lies a cave that remembers more than history ever could. Its walls are lined with centuries of sleep ash from forgotten fires, the dust of vanished tribes, the echoes of voices that no longer belong to names. Here, a single fragment of bone no larger than a coin holds an entire world. Within its marrow lies the signature of a people we never knew, a lineage erased by time but not by blood. The Denisovans. They lived where breath froze before it left the mouth, where the sun rose late and left early. They crafted necklaces from teeth and ivory, slept beside the flicker of guarded flame, and left behind only whispers in the genetic tapestry of humankind. When scientists uncovered their bones, the world widened. A door opened, not forward, but backward, revealing a family we had forgotten. Inside us still lingers their gift. The strength to breathe in thin air, to endure hunger and height, to bear the weight of ice and silence. Their extinction was not erasure, it was transformation. They live now as echoes within us, carried in skin, in muscle, in unseen resilience. Theirs is the inheritance that hums beneath our consciousness, reminding us that even disappearance can become legacy. The cave breathes quietly, as it always has, a pulse of earth itself. Dust settles, snow falls. Somewhere beyond the threshold, wind moves through pines like a slow heartbeat. We are not separate from them. We are the continuation of their fire, the warmth that refused to go out. And as the night thickens beyond the cave's mouth, the stars above remember every vanished people, burning for them still, bright and patient as bone beneath the earth. Far from the continents of cold, across waters that glittered like obsidian under the sun, there lay a forgotten island where the world still dreamed in miniature. Flores, a land where everything that once roamed vast, now walked in whispers. Elephants no taller than deer wandered its jungles. Lizards grew to the size of men. And among them, small humans lived as both predator and prey, Homo floresiensis, the hobbits of prehistory. They were barely a meter tall, yet their minds held the same flame as ours. They chipped volcanic stone into blades, set fires in the bellies of caves, and watched the glow move across the walls like the pulse of the earth itself. Their eyes reflected the same starlight that watched over mammoths in the north and Neanderthals in the west. For hundreds of thousands of years, they endured, far from the reach of their larger kin. In this shrunken world, size was not power, adaptability was. Evolution had folded them into efficiency, small hands, quick thoughts, quiet footsteps. They were a whisper that survived the storm. Then, without warning, the island changed. The sea rose, the forests burned, new hunters arrived from across the waves, tall ones, fire-bearers, echoing the mainland's restless hunger. The little giants vanished into rumor, but on Flores, even the wind seems to remember them. In local tales, they are still alive, tiny people of the forest, glimpsed between roots and moonlight. Perhaps that is memory reshaped by longing, or perhaps memory itself never left. The bones tell us only that they lived with courage. The myths tell us that they never truly died. Flores remains silent, its volcanoes sleeping, its trees heavy with old breath. Beneath the roots, bones rest curled like seeds, waiting for another age to remember. And beyond the island's shore, the sea turns dark and endless again, as if drawing a curtain between what was and what remains. Deep inside the earth, where sunlight had never touched, the walls began to breathe. Each curve of stone was alive with the shimmer of firelight, every flicker revealing colors drawn from the bones of the world: iron, charcoal, ochre, blood. The caves were silent, but not empty. They were cathedrals of memory, where Neanderthals and early humans reached out with trembling hands to preserve what time could not. In the glow of their torches, the first stories of humanity were written not in words, but in light and motion. The paintings were not simple marks. They were declarations of being, of seeing. Mammoths marched endlessly across the stone, lions prowled through the contours of rock, and herds of bison thundered along the uneven walls as if trapped in eternal migration. Some of the animals no longer existed outside these caves. Their bones had already been claimed by frost and soil, yet here they remained, painted in strokes that still pulse with life tens of thousands of years later. The artists may not have known what extinction meant, but they felt its shadow, pressing close in every hunt, every storm, every empty valley where once there had been movement. Each flicker of the torch turned the cave into a living theater. The light made the painted creatures move, galloping, gliding, breathing. The walls were alive with illusion, the dance of flame and pigment making the past visible again. Perhaps this was why they painted, to bring back what was gone, to ensure that even if the flesh vanished, the spirit would endure. It was memory made visible, hope turned into pigment. These caves were not homes, they were sanctuaries. To enter was to cross into a realm between life and myth. The hands of the artists were as important as the animals they depicted. Across the stone, red and black handprints bloom like signatures of defiance. Men, women, even children left their mark in paint, pressing themselves into history. Each handprint is a whisper through time. I was here. I saw. I remembered. Beneath their fingers, they mixed ash with saliva, fat with clay, life with death. Every color they made carried the breath of fire and the touch of earth. Imagine the moment of silence when the last line was drawn, the fire burning low, smoke gathering near the ceiling. Outside, the cold world waited, full of hunger and wind. But inside, there was stillness, warmth, reflection, the pulse of humanity itself. For the first time, the human mind looked backward and forward at once, aware that life was fleeting and beauty could outlive the body. That understanding, quiet, sacred, almost unbearable, was the birth of memory. We will never know the names of these artists. We will never hear their voices or see the expressions in their eyes as they stepped back from the wall. Yet through their art, they speak across 30,000 years, telling us what it means to witness, to endure, to remember. Their world was harsh, filled with cold and darkness, but they found light within it. As centuries passed, their torches died, their bones turned to dust, and the entrances to their sanctuaries closed beneath rock and time. But the walls remained, sealed like time capsules, waiting for our light to find them again. When explorers first broke through the stone and their own torches flickered against the painted walls, the animals began to move once more. The mammoths walked, the horses galloped, the lions breathed, and humanity, standing in that dim firelight, met itself its first reflection, its first dream. The shadows in the cave are not ghosts. They are us, reaching back across eternity, still trying to remember what it means to be alive. The world began to darken. It did not happen in a single night, nor with a single storm, but in a slow and terrible silence. The sky itself seemed to turn against the earth. Mountains that had slept for centuries erupted with fury, spitting ash into the heavens until the sun became a faint red memory. Across continents, day faded into twilight. The light that had once warmed the backs of hunters now arrived thin and cold, filtered through clouds heavy with fire and dust. The world entered a long breath of darkness, a trembling pause in the story of life. It was the end of an age, the Ice Age, dying not with a crash, but with a long, slow exhale. Beneath the dimming skies, snow fell for months without end, burying valleys, forests, and bones alike. Rivers froze solid, their voices silenced beneath thick glass. The wind carried the sting of ash and ice together, whispering through the hollows of abandoned dens and empty plains. Even the giants struggled to endure. Mammoths, who had once ruled the tundra like moving mountains, wandered aimlessly through a landscape they no longer recognized. Their great tusks hung low as they dug for grass buried deep beneath the snow, searching for warmth in a world that no longer offered it. But the cold was only one half of the world's grief. When the fire of the earth quieted and the ash began to fall away, the ice itself began to retreat. Glaciers that had stretched for hundreds of miles melted like wax before a candle. The great white walls that had carved valleys and sculpted mountains began to crumble, releasing their grip on the land. The meltwater roared down in floods so vast they reshaped continents, swallowing forests, drowning entire herds, tearing away everything that had clung to the edge of existence. Where the glaciers had stood, new rivers were born. Lakes formed in the scars of the earth. Grass began to return in patches of green among the gray, but it was too late for many who had lived through the dark. The world that emerged from the great dimming was not the same one that had gone in. The balance had shifted. The age of giants, the mammoths, the cave lions, the towering sloths was drawing to its final breath. For the humans who survived, the change was both a curse and an awakening. They watched the beasts vanish, one by one, into the silence left behind by the ice. The hunters followed the last herds north, chasing shadows through thawing tundra, while others turned inward, learning to live with less. The world that had once been vast and wild grew smaller, gentler, but lonelier. The land softened, and so did the people. They learned to settle, to shape tools of bone and stone into something more than weapons. They began to build lives not around movement, but memory. The great dimming was not just a time of loss, it was a reckoning. The earth had shed one of its skins, and humanity stood blinking in the pale light of what remained. Beneath their feet, the rivers sang new songs, and the air carried the scent of wet soil, of beginning again. But even as the world warmed, the memory of darkness lingered. The people carried it with them in their stories, in their firelight, in their instinct to gather close when the sky grew strange. They had seen the sun fade. They had watched the end of an age. And somewhere deep within, they understood a truth that would echo forever. That even the strongest world can fall silent, and every dawn is borrowed from the night before. The silence began quietly, like a breath drawn in and never released. Across the tundra and forest, the great voices of the world faded one by one. The deep bellows of mammoths that once rolled like thunder across the plains grew distant, then disappeared. The low growl of the saber-toothed cat fell still beneath the snow. The world that had once roared with life became a place of whispers, wind, and absence. The age of giants was ending, not with a storm or a war, but with the slow, sorrowful unraveling of sound itself. For thousands of years, humankind had lived among the mighty. They had watched herds of mammoths darken the horizon, seen the gleam of dire wolves moving through the fog, and feared the flash of fangs in the night. But now, the fires of human hands burned brighter while the wild began to dim. The hunters had learned too much. Spears grew sharper, strategies more cunning. Cooperation and language became the tools that no claw or tusk could match. The mammoth's strength and the lion's teeth meant little against minds that could imagine, plan, and endure. Yet the great silence cannot be blamed on humans alone. The earth itself was shifting. The air warmed, the glaciers retreated, and the grasslands that once fed the herds gave way to forest and flood. Seasons grew unpredictable. Rivers swelled and vanished. The beasts, made for cold and distance, found themselves stranded in a world that no longer knew them. For the first time, hunger followed even the strongest. The great herds thinned. The predators grew desperate, and the ice that had once preserved life now melted it away. Humans, small and tireless, followed in the shadow of this collapse. They hunted not from cruelty, but from the same need that had always driven life to survive another season. Yet, survival carries weight. Every fire they lit burned through the darkness of something greater. Every spear they threw carried the echo of an ending. Whether they knew it or not, they were witnesses to a vanishing participants in the final breath of an ancient order. When they dragged the last mammoth down into the snow, the world grew quieter forever. What replaced that silence was not peace, but thought. In the emptiness left by the giants, humans began to look inward. They carved the shapes of lost creatures into bone and ivory, painted their memories onto stone walls, and spoke of them in stories long after their bones had turned to dust. Memory became the new wilderness. The hunt gave way to reflection. The fire that once warded off beasts now burned for remembrance. The silent extinction was not only the loss of animals, it was the loss of an age when humanity was not alone. When we were part of something vast, untamed, and terrifyingly alive, the world after the giants felt smaller, safer perhaps, but emptier too. Beneath the stars, those who survived carried both triumph and guilt in their hearts, unsure which weighed more. The cold winds still moved through the empty plains, whispering the names of the fallen. As dawn rose on this new world, the first light touched bones frozen in ice, and the echoes of the lost stirred for a moment before fading again. Humanity walked forward, unaware that the silence behind them was the sound of their own beginning. The wind still moves across the empty plains, carrying with it the ghosts of a colder world. Long before cities, before kingdoms or faiths, there was the steppe, a vast, endless wilderness of frost and fire, where survival was carved from the bones of giants. Here, in the silence between storms, humans built their first shelters not from wood or brick, but from the remains of the very creatures that once ruled the earth. The steppe was both cradle and grave, a place where creation and destruction walked hand in hand. Archaeologists have uncovered strange monuments in this frozen expanse, circular huts made from the tusks and skulls of mammoths, bound together with sinew and hide. These were not crude dwellings. They were cathedrals of survival, sanctuaries built in reverence and necessity. Each curved bone was a wall against the wind, each tusk a pillar of endurance. Around these bone houses, the ground is littered with tools chipped from flint, fire pits filled with ash, and fragments of charcoal older than memory itself. Within their blackened rings lie the remains of fires that once burned against the endless cold, the same warmth that kept the ancestors of humanity alive as the Ice Age reached its final breath. But survival here was not without sacrifice. Beneath layers of soil and snow, the evidence tells a story not of harmony, but of conquest. The bones of mammoths and giant bison bear deep marks of flint blades, ribs splintered, skulls crushed, spear points still embedded in ancient flesh turned to stone. In these scars, we see the truth of what it meant to live at the edge of extinction. Humanity's rise was not peaceful. It was written in the language of hunger and fire. Still, the bond between hunter and hunted was not simple brutality. It was respect, even reverence. Each creature taken was honored. Every part used: meat for food, hide for warmth, bone for shelter and tools, ivory for art. On carved tusks found buried in the loam, the shapes of these animals still endure, etched with care by hands that knew both love and dependence. These carvings were not idle decoration, they were remembrance. The people of the steppe understood that every life taken came at a cost. They lived with that truth, carrying it like a flame through the dark. As the world warmed, the grasslands began to fade. Forests crept north, swallowing the open plains. The herds dwindled, retreating with the cold. The hunters followed as far as they could, until one day the mammoths did not return. The steppe grew quiet, its ghosts left to sleep beneath the soil. But humanity remained, carrying fragments of those giants in memory and in bone. In every tool fashioned from ivory, in every mark left upon a cave wall, their legacy persisted. The steppe may be empty now, but its silence is not without voice. It whispers of a time when human hands shaped both life and death, when existence itself was an act of art. The mammoth huts have crumbled, the fires long gone cold, yet their outlines still linger beneath the snow, traces of a balance once held between creation and destruction. The ghosts of the steppe are not spirits of the dead. They are echoes of what it means to endure, to build beauty from ruin, to find warmth in the bones of the fallen, to carry forward even when the world itself seems to end. And in that cold whisper of wind across the plains, we can still hear them, the rhythm of survival, the heartbeat of the earth that once belonged to giants. There was a time when the stars alone governed the darkness. Then came fire, a second constellation, born not of distance, but of defiance. To hold fire was to hold a piece of the sun, to tame something ancient enough to unmake the world. Humanity's relationship with light began here. in the trembling hands of wanderers who learned to coax warmth from wood and spark from stone. Fire changed everything. It redrew the boundaries of night. It made the shadows retreat, made meat soft, made fear smaller. Around its pulse, the tribes gathered bone against bone, heartbeat against heartbeat, and watched sparks rise like tiny spirits escaping into the void. In that flicker, stories were born. Flames licked faces until they glowed like copper, and the silence between words became sacred. The fire did not only warm, it listened. Through the long winters, when cold gnawed at the edges of bone, the fire's glow became the center of the world. It was not merely survival, it was communion. The people fed it wood as they fed themselves food. They understood its moods, the hiss of rain, the crackle of dry pine, the slow sigh of embers dying into gray. It spoke a language that needed no translation. The fire taught patience, rhythm, and ritual. But fire was never loyal. It was both ally and warning, capable of turning shelter to ruin in a breath. One careless spark could transform gratitude into terror. Humanity learned humility from its own invention, a lesson that would echo into every future where power was held too tightly. Still, they returned, night after night, to that trembling center of light, finding in its warmth a reason to stay alive. Under its glow, the world softened. Old enemies cold, hunger, darkness retreated. Fire was memory made visible. It reminded them of the sun when winter forgot it. It was hope with a heartbeat. It was the first technology, the first prayer, the first God. And when dawn came, the last embers cooled to ash. The people would gather them, cradle them in bark, and carry them forward the light of one night, becoming the promise of another. Every sunrise was now twofold, the one in the sky and the one they held in their hands. And so, even as the stars faded, humanity kept its own constellation alive, burning small but eternal against the vast cold that would never stop trying to return. When the giants fell, the earth did not grow silent all at once. The echoes of their passing rippled through soil, air, and blood, changing everything that came after. What began as the death of animals became the transformation of worlds. The mammoths, the saber-tooths, the towering sloths, when they vanished, the rhythm of the planet shifted. The fields they once grazed grew wild. The winds that once swept over their herds began to move differently, and the balance that had endured for millennia began to fracture. The age that followed was not one of beasts, but of aftermath, an age of ash and bone. Across continents, the land itself began to change. Where mammoths had once torn through permafrost and kept the tundra open, forests began to creep northward, spreading roots through the thawing earth. Grasslands turned to dense woodlands, and with them came new species, smaller, quieter, less wild. The great open steppes that had sung with the footsteps of herds grew still. Without the trampling of giants, the soil became soft, the air heavier, the rivers changed their courses. The giants had not only lived upon the earth, they had shaped it, sculpted it, breathed it, and when they were gone, the world they had maintained began to unravel. The loss of megafauna reshaped the climate itself. Without vast herds consuming grass and stirring dust into the sky, carbon began to build in the soil. The air thickened, the planet warmed. The line between cause and consequence blurred. Did the change kill the giants, or did their death change the world? Perhaps both were true. Life and death have always been a circle, and when one great wheel stopped turning, all the smaller ones shifted. For the humans who survived, the absence of giants was both opportunity and inheritance. With the beasts gone, the earth became theirs to tend, or to conquer. The hunters who once followed mammoth trails turned to smaller prey, deer, reindeer, aurochs, and from this change, new patterns of living emerged. The chase gave way to settlement. The spear gave way to the seed. What had been necessity became mastery. The loss of the wild pushed humanity to adapt, to invent, to build. Yet even as they moved forward, the giants did not truly disappear. They lived on in bone and memory, in carvings and stories, in the hidden map of our own bodies. Modern genetics tells us that their echoes persist within us. In the warmth of our blood, in the strength of our muscles, in the way our minds respond to fear and hunger, traces of that ancient coexistence remain. The world before the extinctions lives quietly inside us, reminding us that we were shaped not by comfort, but by survival. The earth, too, still remembers. Layers of ash lie buried beneath every continent, silent witnesses to fire and loss. In the permafrost, the bones of mammoths remain frozen in eternal sleep, their flesh still red beneath the ice, their eyes still turned toward horizons they will never see again. Each discovery, each unearthed skull or fragment of tusk, is not simply a relic. It is a heartbeat caught in stone, a reminder that every extinction leaves an inheritance. The age of ash and bone was not an ending, it was a transformation. The giants fell, but their fall gave rise to a new kind of life, a life that could remember. Humanity carried their ghosts forward, shaping new worlds from the remains of old ones. And though the tundras have grown quiet and the forests dense, somewhere beneath our skin, the memory of that vast, untamed earth still stirs, whispering that we too were born from ash, from bone, and from everything that came before. Long after the giants had vanished, the earth continued to whisper their names through stone. Beneath the fields and riverbanks, under temples and farmland, the bones of a forgotten world waited. They lay there for millennia, silent as the soil, until human hands began to unearth them once again. What began as mystery soon became revelation. The discovery of these bones, massive, ancient, and impossible to ignore, would forever alter how we saw the earth and how we saw ourselves. In the valleys of ancient China, the first farmers struck bone as they plowed their fields. Curved fragments, immense in size, gleamed in the sunlight. They were heavier than stone, smoother than wood, and no one could imagine the creatures they once belonged to. To the people of those early civilizations, they were not the remains of animals, but of dragons, the celestial guardians of earth and sky. Apothecaries ground them into powder, calling them dragon bones, believed to carry the power of strength and healing. Without knowing it, these farmers had cradled the fossilized remains of prehistoric life, mammoths, mastodons, and dinosaurs transformed by myth into medicine. Across the world, similar discoveries stirred human imagination. In Greece, giant femurs unearthed from the hills were thought to belong to heroes of legend, remnants of titans who had once walked among men. In medieval Europe, massive bones found in caves were displayed as proof of biblical stories, evidence of fallen giants, or the creatures that had perished in the Great Flood. The line between faith and science was not yet drawn. The Earth's deep memory was interpreted through stories, not studies. Humanity's understanding of time was still too small to hold the scale of deep history. But the age of wonder would soon give way to the age of inquiry. By the 18th and 19th centuries, curiosity turned to science. Men and women with hammers and notebooks began to roam the cliffs and quarries of Europe, searching for the creatures that once ruled the earth. These were the fossil hunters, the dreamers who chipped away at stone to reveal the story beneath. They worked in the chalk beds of England, the riverbanks of France, the red cliffs of America. With every find, the past grew stranger and more magnificent. When the first full skeleton of a giant reptile was assembled, a creature unlike anything living the world felt the tremor of discovery. The word dinosaur was born, meaning terrible lizard, though they were more wonderful than terrible. Museums rose like temples to time, their halls filled with bones that dwarfed their human observers. Each fossil was a key to an older world, one that defied the limits of scripture and shook the foundations of certainty. The earth, it turned out, was not young. It was ancient, layered, and alive with ghosts. The fossils told of ages beyond imagination, oceans that had dried to dust, forests that had turned to stone, and creatures that had ruled long before humanity was even a thought. These discoveries did not destroy faith, they expanded it. They forced humanity to confront the immensity of existence, to see creation as something vast, evolving, and ongoing. In time, the bones became more than relics. They became mirrors. When we looked at them, we saw not only what had come before us but what we might one day become, a brief flicker in the endless story of life. The fossils taught humility. They reminded us that everything we build, everything we believe, rests upon a foundation of vanished worlds. Today, the dragon bones still lie beneath us, waiting for the next curious hand to find them. And when they do, the same wonder will rise again, the awe of realizing that beneath the soil we walk every day lies the memory of giants, and within that memory, a reflection of ourselves. Before science could name the past, imagination gave it faces. In a world without paleontology or geology, bones spoke through myth. The earth yielded fragments of something immense, but no one yet knew what it meant. Every skull, every tusk, every petrified bone, unearthed from the ground, was treated as a whisper from the gods, a story half told in stone. And so, before the age of knowledge came the age of wonder, when myth filled the silence that fossils left behind. Long before museums and laboratories, shepherds, miners, and farmers stumbled upon bones that seemed too large to belong to any living creature. In the caves of Greece and the islands of the Aegean, they found skulls with great hollow openings in the center of the forehead. To ancient eyes, they were unmistakable, the remains of one-eyed giants. The Greeks called them cyclopes, the monstrous builders of mountain forges who had crafted the thunderbolts of Zeus. Yet those hollow sockets were not eyes at all. They were the nasal cavities of mammoths and mastodons. Their trunks long vanished, their true nature hidden by the slow art of time. Elsewhere, in the hills of Asia, great bones emerged from the earth after storms and landslides. Curved ribs, vast jaws, claws turned to stone. The people who found them saw dragons. To them, these were the coiled remains of celestial beasts that once ruled the clouds and rivers. They placed the fossils in shrines, ground them into medicine, and wove them into legends of thunder and flight. In these stories, bones became divine. They were not relics of extinction but proof of immortality, the spirits of powerful creatures that had withdrawn from the world, but not from memory. In the deserts of North Africa, fossilized vertebrae were mistaken for the remains of sea serpents slain by heroes. In the mountains of Europe, enormous femurs were carried to cathedrals and displayed as bones of biblical giants, proof that the sons of gods once walked among men. Even in the Americas, where mastodon skeletons rose from the mud of riverbanks, local tribes spoke of thunder beasts, great creatures whose footsteps made the sky rumble and the ground tremble. These interpretations were not foolishness, but poetry. Humanity, standing in the half-light of knowledge, reached for meaning the only way it knew how: through story. Each bone became a sentence in an ancient language that people longed to understand. Myths filled the gaps where reason had not yet arrived. They turned confusion into wonder, and wonder into belief. The earth itself became a storyteller, whispering through fossils that seemed to confirm that we had once shared this world with monsters, gods, and spirits. When science finally found its footing, the myths did not vanish. They transformed. The Cyclops skull became a mammoth. The dragon became a dinosaur. The Titan became a species long gone, but still remembered in every awe-filled gaze toward the fossil halls of museums. Yet something of that old reverence remained. Even the scientists, chiseling carefully through stone, felt the sacred weight of what they touched. For though they no longer believed in dragons or titans, they understood what those stories had tried to express: the feeling of standing small in a world built on giants. We now know the truth behind those bones, but knowledge has not dimmed their mystery. The fossils still hold the same quiet power they always did. They remind us that before there was science, there was imagination, and before we could measure time, we dreamed it. The bones of the earth were our first teachers, telling us that life is older, stranger, and more enduring than any story we can write. And perhaps, somewhere deep within, we still believe the old tales just a little. For when we look upon the empty eyes of ancient skulls, part of us still sees the gaze of something greater, watching us from the forgotten ages, reminding us that all myths begin with truth buried, waiting, beneath our feet. The past is not buried in stone alone. It breathes quietly within us, written not on cave walls or ancient bones, but in the spiraling code of our blood. Every heartbeat carries the echo of lives long vanished, every cell a small archive of forgotten encounters. Though the Neanderthals and Denisovans disappeared tens of thousands of years ago, they are not gone. They endure in fragments of our genome, silent inheritances passed down through the long corridors of time. The bones of the earth tell one story, but the blood tells another, a story of union, survival, and memory etched into the very structure of who we are. When modern scientists began to unravel the human genome, they expected to find a clean lineage, a clear distinction between us and those who came before. But as the strands of DNA unfolded, something unexpected appeared. Buried within the sequence of modern humans were traces that did not belong to us alone. Genetic signatures matched those of Neanderthals from Europe and Denisovans from the icy caves of Siberia. These were not distant cousins, they were ancestors in part. The old boundaries between species blurred. Humanity, it seemed, was not a single story but a woven tapestry of lives once thought extinct. In those ancient crossings, there was no concept of difference. The earth was harsh and survival fragile. Where tribes met, sometimes they fought, and sometimes they joined. The unions that followed, brief or enduring, left behind something more lasting than footprints. They left fragments of resilience coded into flesh. From the Neanderthals we inherited strength, thicker bones, denser muscles, the endurance to survive cold and hunger. From the Denisovans came something subtler but equally vital. An adaptation to high altitudes, the ability to breathe thin air, to live in places where others could not. Even our immune systems bear their mark. The defenses that protect us from ancient plagues were first forged in the bodies of those we once called other. What science revealed was not contamination but kinship. We are not the final product of human evolution, but the living sum of shared endurance. Every time a geneticist reads these sequences, they are hearing the quiet voices of those who vanished into the snow, whose bones were lost but whose strength remained. We are mosaics of survival, patchworks of the forgotten. The realization is humbling. It means that the story of humanity did not move in straight lines or clean breaks. It flowed, merged, and intertwined like rivers joining in the dark. The ancient world was not a battlefield of extinction, but a network of encounters, some violent, some tender, that wove together the lineage of our species. The blood remembers what history forgot. Even today, in the faces of people across the world, those hidden inheritances flicker to life. A ridge in a brow, a breath in the chest, a certain endurance in the cold, all whispers from ancestors whose names were never written. When we breathe with lungs that carry echoes of mountain air once filled by Denisovans. When we fight sickness, we do so with defenses first tested by Neanderthals against Ice Age storms. Modern technology has only confirmed what the old stories intuited, that we are not alone, nor have we ever been. The ancient ones walk with us still, unseen but undeniable. In every drop of blood, they endure. Their extinction was not an erasure, but a transformation. Their bones turned to dust, but their essence became our inheritance. So when we look into the mirror, we are not seeing a single being. We are seeing the sum of countless lives, countless unions, countless struggles. The genome is not a record of purity, it is a song of survival, written in many voices, passed from fire to fire, from age to age. The hidden humans are not ghosts of the past. They are our beginning, our strength, our living memory carried quietly beneath the skin of time. There was a time when the night belonged to many fires. They pulsed across valleys and coasts like living constellations, each flame circling its own gravity of breath and hunger. Wind braided the smoke together, and the darkness could not tell one tribe from another. Humanity was plural then, a family of separate strengths, a ring of cousins keeping vigil beneath the same indifferent stars. Footsteps overlapped on damp riverbanks. Flint songs echoed from distant cliffs and answered one another without knowing. The earth felt busy with mind. Neanderthals tended the slow heart of winter with a tenderness that left ash where bones should have broken. In narrow gorges and pine-thick uplands, they read the frost as if it were scripture written by hoof and feather. Their hands were careful with stone, their shoulders fluent in labor, their shelters mounded against weather like sleeping animals. Further east, it is said the high country held a breath of people tuned to thin air, bodies acquainted with the summit's glare. Denisovan blood moved like mountain light through their veins, a quiet engineering of endurance. On far islands wrapped in salt and birdsong, little fires belonged to little people, swift as shadows, precise as swallows. Their scale fit the jungle's pulse, their spears fit the island's dream. Our own kind moved between these circles, not as rulers, but as participants in a wide experiment of survival. Sometimes, we shared a valley and a season. Sometimes we traded embers and routes, learning the scent of cliffs that held goats and the slack of river bends where fish slowed their silver. Sometimes in the deep winter, when the wind carried no color, bodies drew close. Warmth crossed species the way rivers cross borders, and in the morning, a new inheritance began to hum inside the living. The genome, that patient ledger kept beneath breath, added new lines in its quiet script. Tolerance for ice, keener lungs for height, answers to fevers we had not yet met, we learned even in the dark. The beasts still moved like weather at the edge of sight. Mammoths braided the horizon with tusk and steam, their rumbles testing the ribs of the world. Lions threaded silence with gold. Wolves practiced their arithmetic on the moonlit plain. We were not alone among the human, we were not alone among the wild. Companionship was not safety, but it was shape. It gave contour to fear and apprenticeship to need. We learned to share absence and to divide awe. Loss did not come like war drums. It moved like weather, too slow to notice until the hills were bare of certain shadows. One cousin folded into us and went quiet in the visible world. Another faded the way spring snow fades on the north face, still present in hollows, gone from the paths. The last island fires dimmed to rumor. Our circle thinned until a single kind remained to clean the bone and carry the ember. The night, for the first time, looked back with fewer eyes. Loneliness is also a teacher. It taught us to enlarge our speech, to fill the wider silence with symbol and measure. It taught us to keep better books of the sky, to draw maps of winds and days. Beneath that new craft, the old chorus still murmured. In our marrow, plural fire continued. In our lungs, mountain air remembered itself. In our blood, hands we never held kept working. Dawn comes slowly in this chapter of the world, a gray admission across the plains. The last plumes of mammoth breath dissolve into morning. Our single fire brightens. The ground waits without thunder. The fields to come have not yet been promised, but the seed of their promise is already warm in the pocket of a traveler, with ash on the fingers and a horizon in mind. And in that wash of pale light, the many fold themselves into one, and the one steps forward toward a quieter world that asks to be made of furrow and memory. When the thunder of herds drained from the valleys and the air lost the cool musk of old breath, a new rhythm arrived like a careful drum. The soil, unpounded by tusk and hoof, rested. Grass no longer braided itself to the migrations of giants. It grew tall and unadvised, bending to wind that had no bodies left to read. In that wider hush, we discovered a different kind of endurance. We learned the patience of seeds. At first it was observation, the way all bold acts begin. Grains fell near the fire ring and sprouted where ash kept the ground soft. Tubers remembered where the digging stick returned. The hand that once threw a spear for a living weight now pressed a kernel into silt and covered it with mourning. Fire, which had guarded our nights, became a companion to daylight, baking clay, hardening fence posts, sweetening the bitterness out of roots. We stayed to watch what staying could teach. Staying altered the geometry of hunger. The trail shortened into a path between hearth and field. Children grew into the same horizon that watched their grandparents die. Shelter, no longer a brief translation of mammoth rib into arch, became wall and lintel and threshold. Storage learned the smell of rain and mouse. Counting, first a whisper in the mind, arranged itself into pebbles and marks, into notched bones and knots. The ledger that stone once kept became a human habit. Every gain wrote its quiet cost in the margins. Variety, that old strategy against famine, narrowed into rows. Shoulder and knee, once trained to distance, learned the ache of repetition. The wild made its objections in weed and locust, in rot and rust. Where the mammoth had given us a cathedral when it fell, the field asked for tithe, a calendar of kneeling. In the bend of the back, the body remembered winter, but discovered a new winter in summer sun's weight across a day that refuses any shade. The past did not surrender. Under the plots, bones remembered a colder grammar. Plows knocked ivory from sleep. Fossils turned up in furrows, and the old myths walked into villages disguised as medicine, omen, story. We ground dragon bone to powder and mixed it with our fear, our hope, our fever dreams. The cave walls still held their moving animals in private, humming to the torches of the rare traveler who descended to ask the stone what it knew. Above ground, we painted the same beasts on storage jars, on pillars, on our sleep. Loneliness sharpened the ear. We listened for other fires and found none. We listened for the hooves and found thunder only in storms. To temper the silence, we multiplied our own thought, sent it outward in carved signs and measured fields. We domesticated hunger into grain, darkness into lamp, time into line. The world answered with weather and soil and the old, implacable arithmetic of life and death. We negotiated, we built, we buried, we unearthed. At dusk, a field is a sea of chaff whispering the names of winds. At dawn, it is geometry and dew. Between those hours, we stood at the edge of what we had made and felt the pull of what we had left. The steppe still lived in the chest as a second country. The mammoth still moved in dream. Immense and indifferent, turning the horizon like a wheel. We inherited a world and then began to inherit ourselves, crafting continuity from absence. Civilization gathered itself like a cloak against weather and time. Under that cloak, the old fires kept their customs. A grandmother warmed her hands and remembered a hunt she had not lived, a cousin she had never met, a breath that shook cold out of air. The harvest moon rose, fat with reflectance. In its light, the fields looked briefly like the backs of moving herds. And as the granaries filled with the slow gold of summer, night opened like a cave above the village, and the stars resumed their first occupation, telling us we are small, and asking us to listen. Lie down where the earth exhales, and the grass cools to the temperature of starlight. The wind loosens from the hills and combs the plain with a wide, patient hand. In this hour, edges soften, the day unties its knots, the world returns to its first grammar of dark and spark. Close breath to the ground and you can hear a low music, the layered rumor of roots, the faint glassy talk of insects, the longer echo of rivers speaking in their sleep. Memory travels differently at night. It rises like mist from soil. Let the body rest inside the old scales of cold and warmth, hunger and ease. Let the lungs borrow their rhythm from the pines. In, out, sap, sky. Above, the constellations arrange themselves into the first stories. Mammoth in migration, lion in the hush between leaps. The small fire of a human tribe stitched upon the firmament in a cluster that never burns out. The stars are fossils of light. Fossils are stars kept in stone. Between them, the earth keeps faith with its dead. Under these fields lie the tusks that once taught wind to sing, the ribs that once housed winter. Deeper still, a different empire sleeps the vertebrae of lizards with lightning for spines, the helmets of skulls that learn to bite the sea. Time has been folding and unfolding here longer than thought, and yet the ground accepts your weight without complaint. You are late, but you are welcome. The library beneath does not close. Think of the first fires and the last, sparks rising into the cold like a flock, then thinning, then gone, leaving behind a bowl of ash that remembers the light. We carried such bowls across ice and hunger, from valley to valley, from cave to field, until our pockets smelled permanently of charcoal and our palms knew the shape of ember. Sleep is another ember. It dims without ending. It keeps the night in a form the morning can understand. The beasts return when the eyelids lower. They step from the edge of sight, the way fog steps from a river. Mammoths breathe steam into the air and make it briefly visible. Cats move along the margin where shadow is muscle. Birds with jaws instead of beaks cast their slow oars across a lake with the color of iron. None of this contradicts the ledger of stone. It is the ledger made tender, read aloud by a voice that only the sleeping hear. We were never meant to forget entirely. The genome hums like a hive in summer, lining the chambers of the heart with old wax, teaching the body to forgive its solitude by remembering its plural. The mind, which spent so many seasons sharpening edges, allows them to round again in rest. In that rounding, loss loosens its grip. What vanished returns as guidance. What remained understands its debt. Let the last awake thought be simple and shared breath, leaving the chest into air that has been breathed by every cousin and creature that found night and made peace with it. Let the cold be correct and the warmth sufficient. Let endurance wear its soft face. Let transformation resume its slow, dignified work beneath consciousness, where recovery and inheritance hold their conference without us. Morning will come from the east as it always has, stroked forward by the turning of a planet that learned endurance first and taught it to every living thing. The fields will pale. The birds will inventory the hedges. A single ash will keep its ember the way a sentence keeps its meaning. Wakefulness will find the trail where you left it. For now, the world asks for nothing. It grants asylum to the tired and a country to the wandering mind. Sleep inside the long memory. Sleep where the hunters cured their fear beside fire and where the gatherers learned the taste of sweetness from frost. Sleep under the durable architecture of stars and the quiet truce of soil. Sleep as the ancients slept, held by the same dark, forgiven by the same dawn. And as your breath settles into the old cadence, the night closes gently like a book whose pages have warmed in the hands, promising that when it opens again, the story will still know your name.